Hello everybody, welcome to our July Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is switching to HTTPS. We'll be going through the process of how to modify your website to be HTTPS only and what you need to change in OU Campus. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as this session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online by clicking on the Q&A tab located on the right-hand side of your screen. Type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen and send. Please make sure to address your question to the presenter or all panelists so that we can all see it. Otherwise, we won't be able to see your question. So again, address your questions to the presenter or to all panelists. We will attempt to address your questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation is ended, we will review and answer all remaining questions. Your presenter today is Brandon Shireman, software trainer at OmniUpdate, and we also have Robert Kiffey, Senior Support Specialist, here to answer questions as well. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Brandon. Take it away.
Thanks, Erica. Once again, everybody, welcome to Training Tuesday. Looking forward to talking about switching over to HTTPS today. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into switching over to HTTPS. There's a lot of different complexities, so we'll be kind of doing a high-level overview with all of this sort of stuff today. As Erica mentioned, I've got Rob Kiffey here with me. He's got a lot of experience helping customers just like you guys switch over to HTTPS. So if you guys have some more specific questions, he might be able to chime in with some more details. But like I said, there is a lot of complexity that comes with this topic, so I hope this just gives you kind of a good overview. What we're going to talk about first is, some of the basics. We're going to just kind of cover what HTTPS is, the benefits of switching over to HTTPS, and then we'll kind of be covering the steps involved to make that switch. So, of course, there are some things that need to happen on the production server. So getting your actual web server to serve up content over HTTPS. We'll be just talking kind of in general terms for that sort of stuff because there's a lot of different server configurations and it's kind of impossible to talk about all of them all at once in just this. But where we'll really spend most of our time is once you've made those production server steps figured out, the next thing is getting your content inside of OU Campus to, essentially abide by that new standard. So we'll be covering some of the things that you'll want to watch out for once you've made your switch over on the production server side and then taking it from there. And then also we want to look a little bit ahead. HTTPS is obviously a really hot button topic, really popular these days to talk about. And in OU Campus, there's actually some other things that we can do moving forward with the product in a future version release. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little taste of what that feature might be and what it'll do. But most of our time will be spent in a live demonstration of some things that we can do inside of OU Campus once the production server steps have kind of been taken care of. And of course, we'll do Q&A and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What is HTTPS overall? So HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, secure. Some people will call it HTTP over SSL. Pretty much they all mean kind of the same thing. It's just, serving content just like you would over HTTP, but now that content is going to be secured or encrypted. So you're going to be using SSL, which stands for Secure Socket Layer. That's kind of the more popular encryption method these days. There's also a protocol called TLS, which is available as well. I think that's the newer method that is gaining traction these days, but SSL is still very popular. And it's just essentially encrypting all of the web traffic that's coming to your browser as opposed to passing all of that data through in plain text, which is what happens with normal HTTP. So with HTTPS, of course, that data is going to be sent in conjunction with a security certificate, and the browser essentially validates that certificate and then actually delivers that content to your browser window. So that security certificate is how, the browser knows that the content that it's receiving is from a trusted source, and that information is, valid and real and stuff like that. So there are certain things on the web these days that require you to have HTTPS active. So things where you're collecting account information like usernames and passwords, or online purchases, credit card numbers, anything where there's like centralized secure information that changes hands. Those pages specifically require HTTPS nowadays, but there's a large push to just push everything over to HTTPS, especially with some of the security and privacy concerns that have come forth in the web these days. There's been a big push to just get everything over to HTTPS, regardless of whether that page is specifically, meant to receive sensitive information or not. So with that in mind, kind of keeping that as our foundation, why would we consider switching? What's important for higher ed in that sort of case? There's a couple of reasons. Obviously, it says it in the name, HTTPS is secure, so there's some security reasons why you would want to consider switching. The first thing is protecting user privacy. So even if the user might not necessarily be, giving you some specific sensitive information, when they are navigating over the web over HTTPS, their privacy, their browsing patterns, and things like that are a little bit more private as opposed to over just normal HTTP. Of course, also protecting personal info submitted onto the site. That's already happening nowadays, but, HTTPS is going to be, there's going to be more and more interactivity on the web as time goes on, and there's going to be more and more chances for users to provide any sort of, personally identifiable information. And the more HTTPS that we have across the web, the better for those reasons, of course. And then finally, security reasons from kind of a hacking perspective and things like that. Third parties can't intercept your data and then modify it before, between the server and it coming to your browser. We can't have there's no such thing as like a man-in-the-middle attack where someone would intercept the data, modify it, and then deliver it to you with that modified data, tricking you essentially into viewing content that you didn't want to, or, submitting data to a place that you didn't intend for it to be submitted to. So security reasons are probably the most self-evident reasons why you'd want to switch over to HTTPS. Another reason, though, is also from the SEO standpoint. So starting in, I think, the middle of 2014 or so, Google has said that they are giving websites served over HTTPS a small boost in their search rankings. So that's another thing to keep in mind as time goes on and more things go HTTPS. You want to stay ahead of the SEO curve and make sure that your results are still going to be up here at the top of the list. Also, your referral information is preserved. So, from an analytics standpoint, if you're tracking referral links and things like that, if those links are coming from an HTTPS source and you're still on HTTP, you're not going to be able to get as much data than if the source of those referrals are HTTPS and you're also HTTPS. So moving forward as time goes on, you're going to be able to, glean more analytic data from that type of stuff as well if you have your site switched over to HTTPS as well. And then finally, kind of a peer pressure standpoint, there's been, like I said, a huge push for websites to transition over to HTTPS. The number of top websites, according to like Alexa rankings and things, that number has doubled in the last year alone, and it's gone up probably another 10% in the year before that. So as time goes on, more and more people are going to transition, so you might as well stay ahead of the curve from that standpoint. Also, browsers are going to kind of start switching their approach. Back in the day, before HTTPS was a large standard, they would kind of notify users when a user was viewing a secure site because it was so uncommon, they wanted to kind of call it out. Now with HTTPS kind of becoming more of the standard, they're now going to be starting to notify users more and more when they're not on HTTPS. And we can kind of see a quick example of that as well. So, you know, if you don't want your users to get a warning in their browser saying, hey, this site might not be secure, that's another reason to switch. And then also for future-proofing. So there's new standards across the web that are being developed as time goes on. One of the standards is called HTTP2. I think, you know, right now we're on HTTP 1.1. HTTP2, in order for you to use that kind of standard, requires your site to be served over HTTPS. And there's also research that says that HTTP2 has led to increased speeds for load times and things along those lines. So not only that, do you get access to this nice new standard that has all of these other features with it, but also there's a potential performance uptick for you to make that switch over there. So transitioning to HTTPS gives you access to HTTP2, which means that you would be able to reap the benefits of those faster load times as well, potentially. And then also, as time goes on, more and more APIs are requiring HTTPS to actually work. So as, you know, once again, as the web gets more interactive and plugins are, you know, being taken back and forth all across for other people, things like geolocation, all of that stuff requires HTTPS nowadays, and it seems to be that the trend is going to transition more and more to requiring that type of stuff. So just one more reason why you might as well make the switch now to ensure that you don't have things break kind of midstream and then you have to scramble to get a fix going. So with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and kind of talk about making that switch in the first place. So as I mentioned in the general kind of agenda, the first thing you need to do is you actually have to have your web server serve up content over HTTPS. Before you do anything inside of OU Campus, you got to, you know, get these steps going on first. The first general step you need to take is you need to obtain a proper and valid certificate. Like I said, SSL is pretty much the standard these days, it seems. But just kind of depending on your server configuration, I'm sure that your hosting provider and things like that can give you information as to what kind of certificate, the level of encryption that you need, all of those sorts of details you can kind of obtain there. That'll be specific to your use case, because I know that our customers use a wide variety of different hosting providers and production server setups and all that type of stuff. So first of all, you got to get a certificate. The second thing is you're going to grab that certificate and you're going to install it onto your web server and then configure the web service to actually start, you know, getting things served over HTTPS. And then the third general step that you'll need to take is figuring out how you're actually going to get your users to view that HTTPS content. And there's kind of two approaches of this. The first approach is, do we want to be able to kind of have HTTPS content and HTTP content kind of serving side by side? So if there is still HTTP content on your web server, you could still, you know, have that served unsecurely, but then all of your new stuff would still be on HTTPS. Or you could just kind of make a hard switch and just deliver everything on that web server over HTTPS without anything on HTTP. The way that that's typically achieved is using a feature called HSTS. In terms of the details for kind of the pros and cons for those benefits, HSTS and switching everything over can make the process a little bit more, a little more automated for your end users. So instead of them having to like re-bookmark stuff or anything like that, the HSTS switch will essentially allow the web server to serve HTTPS content even if you originally put in a URL that started with just HTTP. But the trade-off is that HSTS has this thing called permanence, where sometimes if you turn HSTS on, it will everything will load over HTTPS, and if you weren't ready to make that switch, like if you still had content that was being served unsecurely, that might cause issues until you fix that. And the process, if you enable that permanence option, that process isn't reversible for a certain amount of time. So it's just definitely something you want to, this kind of third step right here for how you're going to serve that content, it's probably a good idea to make sure that everything on your site is working on HTTPS first before you really make like the hard switch over, so all of your users are going to be seeing that stuff too. But like I said, there's a whole lot of other specifics that come into this process. This is just kind of the general steps. The IT teams at your schools should at least be able to help you along the path with this, and also your hosting provider, whoever's providing your production server hosting. I'm sure that they have recommendations. They might even have best practices, and they'll definitely have instructions for these 3 general steps, and they can help you with all of this sort of information. So production server, that's kind of the whole, step over there. The next thing we want to talk about, though, are the steps you can take in OU Campus to make sure all of your content is complying with the security standards that HTTPS requires. So there's kind of 2 main areas that you are going to be checking your content with to ensure that everything is good to go. And the first and most important one of those is making sure that your page resources are being brought into your page via HTTPS. Basically, when we're talking about a page resource, we're talking about things that are loading within that page. So your CSS, images, font files, anything that's being loaded in through an iframe, JavaScript, all of that sort of stuff. Any sort of script tags, any sort of CSS, all of that stuff needs to be brought into your pages via HTTPS. Now, for most cases, you have your CSS loaded on the same server as the rest of your content. So usually when you make that switch, it's a pretty easy fix. But especially if you're bringing in content from external sources, for example, social media buttons or like widgets from third parties, all of that stuff also needs to be brought in via HTTPS, because basically browsers are going to block any unsecured content that's being loaded onto your pages once the page itself is being loaded over HTTPS. So if you had a third-party widget, for example, and that script, for example, was being brought onto your page in an unsecured manner, the link was HTTP as opposed to HTTPS, that script's not going to load. The browser is going to block it, and that functionality is going to break. So you want to make sure that that stuff is fixed before you tell all your users to start, loading all of its content over HTTPS. So that's going to be kind of the first thing that you're going to want to make sure that all of these resources are loaded onto your pages via HTTPS. And then the next thing you also want to do is make sure that your links to all of your pages are using HTTPS as well. So there's a couple of things that you can do to make that process pretty quickly. With the benefit of Dependency Manager inside of OU Campus, all of the pages that exist within your site, you're going to be able to fix all of those links with just one step. You're going to go into the site setup in OU Campus and change your HTTP route to just have the S in front of HTTP, and that will essentially repair all of your links inside of Dependency Manager. So anything that's managed by Dependency Manager is fairly quick there. The other thing you want to make sure is that any absolute URLs, anything that you've hard-coded either inside of your XSL or, links that are living just hard-coded on your pages or things like that, that stuff also needs to be changed to point to HTTPS as well. Like I said, any of the absolute URLs that are created using Dependency Manager, that stuff's going to be fixed automatically as soon as you change your HTTP route in site settings. Any links that live on your site that are root relative or page relative, those are protocol agnostic. Basically, they don't have HTTPS or HTTP in the link itself. It's just going to use whatever the protocol was already using. So those you don't need to worry about. Those are going to be, nothing you need to worry about in those areas because it's not even a question. But then the final thing is that, of course, not all of the links on your site are going to are going to be referencing internal pages. Of course, you're going to link out to external sources and external sites and things like that. If you have links that are pointing to pages that still use HTTP, you can't control the entire web. You might be ahead of the curve from some of the websites that you're linking to. If you are sending a user away from your page and sending them to another page that does use OU Campus, or that doesn't use OU Campus and doesn't use HTTPS, those are still okay. Eventually they'll probably make their transition, and then it's kind of on them to make sure that, links pointing to those files are good to go. I have a quick little question here or a quick little comment, I suppose. And they're just basically saying, I believe OU has a find and replace mechanism for strings in our CMS to find all instances of HTTP : widener.edu and be replaced with HTTPS, correct? You're absolutely right. That's going to be kind of the primary thing that we'll be using in OU Campus to make sure that all of the stuff that needs to be HTTPS is going to be HTTPS. We have a couple regexes that you could use to make sure that you're capturing the exact web pages that need to be captured. But yeah, the find and replace tool is going to be one of your best friends along this whole process to make sure all of your stuff is good to go inside of OU Campus. The other kind of third step that you want to make sure that you take, page resources are absolutely the most important because this could lead to broken functionality. Page links are also still good and important to take care of. The third stuff is kind of two other options. Any RSS items inside of OU Campus, if you have media items that are associated with your RSS feed, so like an image or a video that's associated with a media item, you would want to just go into the RSS screen inside of OU Campus and just make sure that those media items are being brought in over HTTPS. That's going to be one of those things that won't be, that the dependency manager doesn't manage, so it's just another place where you want to check those absolute URLs. And also, if you have any client-side redirects inside of OU Campus, which a client-side redirect is just a simple HTML page that has the meta tag called meta refresh, and you basically just write in a URL where you want people to be redirected to. That's also another thing that's hard-coded potentially, so you want to just make sure that those redirects are also pointing to HTTPS when they need to be. But in any case, those are kind of the three main areas that we'll be checking, and I have a couple of examples where we can kind of look through a couple of these things here today. But kind of moving forward, looking ahead to new things that will be coming into OU Campus fairly soon. One of the things that we have is OU Campus version 10.6. That's going to be coming out fairly shortly. One of the features that's going to come out with version 10.6 is something we have kind of called always use HTTPS. So with this feature, it's basically if your site meets certain requirements, you can activate HTTPS for all of OU Campus. For a little bit of context, I had another bullet point up here. I'm not quite sure why it didn't show up yet, but what happens in OU Campus now is that some pages inside of OU Campus use HTTPS, so like your site setup information, anytime you have like a username or a password or an account or anything like that that you would be able to view or edit, those pages right now in OU Campus are being served over HTTPS, but not necessarily all of your pages. So like if you're just in the pages list view or you're on the dashboard, by default that still uses HTTP in OU Campus right now. But if you activate this always use HTTPS feature, then as long as everything else is kind of good to go, OU Campus will kind of make sure that everything that needs to be HTTPS is HTTPS, and then once you activate this button, it will have all of the pages within OU Campus. So every screen that you're viewing within the CMS will be served over HTTPS in that way. So some requirements that need to be set before this feature can be activated. You need to have your HTTP route set to be HTTPS. Any published targets, so additional production servers that you can send to, those also need to have their HTTP route set to HTTPS. Auxiliary sites, all of that stuff as well. Other things like if you have your template thumbnails hosted on your production server, those would need to be pulled in via HTTPS. Any add-on URLs that you have, if you have any custom gadgets, those also need to be brought in via HTTPS. And then you would just make sure you'd want to manually review your page code, that everything inside of your page code will be using HTTPS as well. So kind of all of this stuff that I'm talking about here would be happening after your page content, after all of these steps over here. Once all this stuff is done and once your production server has been set up, then you can kind of essentially go through some of these other things and just say, yep, I've got all of this stuff served over HTTPS as well. And once that's good to go, then you can turn on this always use HTTPS feature. And OU Campus, when you're in the CMS, will use HTTPS at all times. So just as a quick reminder, this is still separate from enabling HTTPS on your live site. It's just another way that we can have all of the activity within the CMS be done securely as well. So just one thing to look forward to with the release of version 10.6, for those of you who are already transitioned to HTTPS, you can pretty much go through this and probably activate it pretty quickly. But then for those of you who are still considering making the switch over HTTPS, once you've made that switch, you can go ahead and trigger this feature once 10.6 has been released.
We have a question from Richard Oda who asks, what about image galleries?
Image galleries is a great question. So image galleries will be automatically, the images that live within the galleries should be automatically switched over. As soon as you change your HTTP route, you would just need to republish the image gallery, and then it will essentially send those images and put them over on HTTPS as well. So that'll be one of those situations where the fix is fairly cheap. Or fairly easy. I don't know, cheap. It doesn't cost you anything. You just a couple mouse clicks. We actually have another question here from Larry, and he's asking, will OU be offering an HTTPS checker for things that need to be switched over to HTTPS on my site? It just kind of depends in that sort of situation. It's hard for there to be like an automated tool to validate which things need to be HTTPS versus which things don't need to be HTTPS. Because like I said, sometimes there will still be links that will point to unsecured content that's okay to point to an unsecured content because it's an external link that's referencing another page. There may be other third parties that can do that as well. I don't think that we have, there's nothing in the system right now that would, fully do that. But that's kind of why we take these steps here to just validate. Some of it's just a matter of just making sure that you're going through your page content and making sure that once you make the HTTPS switch on your production server, that there's no functionality or no scripts that are going to be breaking in that way. Let's see. So let's see if my animation for that final, oh, there it is. There's my my little thing here, but there we go. In any case, let's go ahead and hop into kind of an example of some HTTPS content inside of OU Campus and work through a couple places that you want to go ahead and make sure that everything is working correctly. So what I've got here is I've got just a really basic HTML page that is on a server that can deliver HTTPS content. So you can see up here in my browser window, too bad my URL itself can't zoom. I have content right now that is being served over HTTPS. So this page is secure content. However, you'll notice that over here I've got my little site information option in Chrome, and if I click on that, it is telling me that my connection to the site is not fully secure. And basically what this means is that I have, my web page itself is being served over HTTPS, but some of the content that is being brought onto my page is not served over HTTPS. So I get this little warning that's saying, hey, everything is not fully secure yet. Now, when I get to the point of having to make sure that everything is secure, it would be a situation like, GitHub, where you can see that over here on the left we have this little padlock icon, and it's going to tell me, where that certificate is being signed by, and if I click on it, it's going to tell me, hey, there's my secure connection. We are good to go. All of my information is being encrypted. That's what our goal is going to be, to make sure that we get the padlock icon with all of our secured content right here. So what we want to do is I want to see what steps I can take in order to get this page to show me my fully kind of secured padlock icon instead of this, hey, connection's not fully secure. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that I do have on this page that aren't secure just yet. First thing is I have a couple images. Some of them I'm loading over HTTPS, for example, this one. But this image, I know, because I created it, is being loaded over HTTP. How do we know that? Because the image is still actually showing up. I guess as a general rule, one of the things that's probably going to be your best friends during this whole process is going to be dev tools inside of Chrome or, Firebug or anything like that where you're able to essentially look at the code of your page and then also see any sort of errors that are being declared by the browser itself. So what's happening for me is I have a couple warnings here inside of my console, and most of these you can see that they're giving me this warning called mixed content. And the mixed content warning means that some resources that are being loaded onto the page are not being loaded securely. So as an example, my big German Shepherd here is this image right here, standing7.jpg. And we can see that I have a mixed content warning for it. So this page was loaded over HTTPS, but it requested an insecure image. And it basically, Chrome at this point is not blocking those images, but it is throwing us a warning saying, hey, that image needs to be served over HTTPS. And it looks like I have a couple other images that have that same situation. I've got a little dachshund over here, and I've also got a cute little kitty. And all of those are also being loaded over insecure connections. But we also, above that, we have an even worse warning, which is saying mixed content, but it's requesting an insecure script. And in this case, this is an example of kind of a page that is drawing in some content from a third party, and that third party is not delivering that information securely. So in this case, I'm using like an old version of the Share This widget. That's one I think it's pretty common. And I'm loading that script from an unsecured source, and what Chrome is doing is literally blocking it. So I have Share This buttons that are sitting on my page. They're actually meant to sit right underneath my cute little kitten here. But unfortunately, because that script isn't loading, I'm not even going to be able to see those buttons. So this is a kind of a great example of you want to make sure that your widgets and all of the other kind of third-party things that you're bringing into the rest of your site, you want to make sure that that stuff's being loaded securely. Otherwise, you're going to be losing functionality. So let's go ahead and go into OU Campus and kind of see what we can do to get some of that stuff figured out. So I've got my same page here pulled up in OU Campus. What I've done here is I've just made it a simple HTML page. It is just kind of a standalone file. The same principles apply for, basically everybody on this call. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are using, PCF files and having XSL transform those PCF files. The principle is really the same. The only difference is that for you guys, you might have some of these issues showing up inside of your XSL, and so it's not going to be like in the HTML of the page itself. I'm going to have like my scripts and stuff. Hey, there's that unsecure script that I just talked about. It's not going to show up inside of my PCF. It's going to be just in like common.xsl or something like that. So it really just kind of changes where you're going to see this stuff as opposed to, what you're going to do to fix it. Really, the fix is kind of the same. So before we actually go into the source of the page itself, I wanted to talk about one of those first things that you're probably going to get set up, and that is changing your HTTP route. And that's going to be what will fix probably the majority of the links in your site, because that's what's going to govern Dependency Manager and all of your dependency tags. So the way that we go to HTTP route is you're going to go to Setup Sites. You're going to go to whatever site is HTTPS. Hey, I've got a convenient site named just that. And once I get into my site settings, I'm going to just go to my production server FTP settings. And here at the bottom, I just want to make sure that my HTTP route is set up to be HTTPS. If this was still HTTP right here, then that means that all of the links that would be generated from Dependency Manager would create links that started with HTTP, of course, if they were being created as absolute links. Also in the same vein, all of the images that live in my image galleries would also use HTTP as opposed to HTTPS. So that's kind of our first easy fix. Just change our HTTP route to HTTPS. While we're in this same screen, we can also scroll farther down, and I can make my way over to publish targets. If I had multiple publish targets, I would just want to make sure that all of my other publish targets would also be publishing out to HTTPS. Of course, if this other production server is set up to use HTTPS as well. It's just, it's the same setting just for, an alternate place to publish your files to. So that's another thing that you can keep in mind there. This is one of the things that you would want to set up in order to activate that HTTPS everywhere type of option that I mentioned for version 10.6. So that's kind of going to be one of the first things that we'll do is change our HTTP route and hit save. Now, once we change the HTTP route, one of the first things that you might want to do is, in order to get those dependency tags kind of refreshed with the new information and have your image galleries and things like that all working out, is you would also want to make sure that you perform a site publish, although I would recommend probably just waiting for the site publish to be done at the end of things, as opposed to having to do multiple site publishes every time you change one setting along this process. So just keep in mind that at the end of the day, you will want to do a full site publish at the end of it, just to make sure that everything has been refreshed and that all of your information is pushed over to the new standard. But it doesn't necessarily have to immediately follow the change to your HTTP route. So the next thing, once I've changed that, is I also want to go back in and I want to fix any resources that I'm pulling onto this page that are not using HTTPS. So like I said, I have a couple places where I'm doing that. This image right here is being pulled in unsecurely, and these two images are pulled in unsecurely. And then I also have that share this content is that's being pulled in unsecurely. So let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm just going to go back to my interior page here. And I'm just going to dive into the source of it here. And scrolling down, we can see that, first of all, here is my German Shepherd image, you'll notice that it's still actually being pulled in through a dependency tag. I did like a kind of a silly example because I just pointed this dependency tag to a file that didn't live on my HTTPS server. I just had it pulled in from a page or from a server that was pulling in HTTP content. So normally speaking, if this were a dependency tag, since this is a dependency tag, and if this image actually resided on the same server as the rest of my pages did, this would be one thing that would automatically be fixed as a result of me changing the HTTP route. But in this case, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead and replace this dependency tag with an image that actually is on my production server. So if I go ahead and just replace that dependency tag with another file, I can just grab that same little OU logo here. I'm going to still insert it into the source of the page. You could do this really through an editable region as well. Let me go ahead and actually do that here really quickly. So there's my logo. And once I do this, I can go ahead and just, save this page. Hypothetically, I could publish it. And if we publish out the content, and I use my dev tools again to inspect this URL, we can see that the image is being pulled in as a root relative link through HTTPS. So this is actually an example that would have probably not needed to be done, but at the end of the day, you'll notice here that I just have one fewer mixed content warning now. That's really kind of what I wanted to demonstrate. As time goes on and you start modifying these images and making sure that all of them are being pulled in securely, you're going to get fewer of these mixed content warnings inside of your browser. But what I want to talk about next, though, is really the most important one, is the fact that, I'm losing functionality because some of that content's not being pulled in through HTTPS. So let me go ahead and let's go ahead and fix that. So in this case, if I go back into the source of my page, the offending script we can see is just right up here in the top of my share this code, and you can see that it's being pulled in just like so. Now, in some cases, it may be just a simple issue of the fact that they've just changed their hosting for that script and they're serving it over HTTPS. So I guess the first thing that you could potentially do is start by just trying this and seeing if that does anything. And we can see that in this case, that looks like that's not the case. So there are certain situations where that third-party widget or that third external party or whatever is not going to just change over their hosting. They're going to deliver an entirely new method that's using HTTPS instead. So in this example, just changing that script to HTTPS didn't actually do anything. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we might need to go to that third party, and I might need to go and see what the updated way to get those share buttons onto my page actually is. So if I maybe go to get share buttons, and here actually I already made an account. So if you signed up in 2017, that seems to indicate to me that it looks like they've changed their reasoning for how they're actually getting all that stuff taken care of. So click here to customize your buttons. Come on. Why is it not letting me? Oh, my goodness. All right, there we go. I'm not quite sure why that was why that wasn't actually working there. But in this case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I basically just need to pull in a different script tag. There we go. So what I'm going to just go ahead and do here is pretty much just this. So I had to go to the site. I had to grab a new resource, and it looks like the JavaScript now is being pulled in from this different URL. And so I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this and replace my old code that I have and I'm going to replace it with my new code. And if I go back through here, it's just asking me to make sure that wherever I want my share buttons to exist, I just put that div in there. So maybe I can just scroll down here and just make sure there's the same div. So that's still going to be the case. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save here. And if I scroll down, hey, there we go. Now I've got my share buttons. And then I can go ahead and see that on the published page. Everything is showing up nicely. And if we hop back into our DevTools here, we can see that we shouldn't get any of that mixed content blocking warning that we saw before. I'm getting this strange little resource error there, but that still hasn't prevented my ability to actually go ahead and see my sharing buttons, which we didn't have beforehand. So that's kind of a quick little illustration for one thing that you're going to want to make sure that you run through. Obviously, you guys probably have more than just a single little third party that you're bringing in, so you're just going to be wanting to make sure that that content is being pulled in appropriately. In kind of the same vein, if you're bringing in RSS feeds from other sources and things like that, those RSS feeds might also need to be brought in via HTTPS. Or if you're using JavaScript to write URLs like Ajax or something like that, or maybe Ajax is calling PHP and that PHP is generating URLs for you. Another thing that you want to make sure is that those scripts, the URLs that they generate, also are generating HTTPS URLs, because in the same sort of vein, that content is ultimately going to be displayed on your pages. Those URLs can be leveraged in a whole wide variety of different ways. And so pulling that stuff in via HTTPS and making sure that your scripts are doing that is going to ensure that you're not going to be losing any sort of functionality. As another quick example, really quickly, if I, for example, didn't have, maybe I had some additional CSS that was being pulled in through some sort of additional resource, and that CSS wasn't being pulled in securely, it's the same sort of thing. So let's just go ahead and see what happens if I try to load CSS over HTTP on a secure page. So you can see that my main CSS is just kind of like your standard bootstrap stuff, and right now it's being loaded from a root relative link inside of my site, which means that this link wouldn't need to be changed under normal circumstances. It would pretty much be it would be fixed already, because it's, like I said, protocol agnostic. If your site's HTTPS, this link will still use HTTPS because it's just going to take whatever the browser is already using and just appending this at the end of it. But if I were to go here and say http:// let's just go ahead and use a site. I pretty much re-uploaded this to a site that uses HTTP. So let's just go ahead and do that really quickly. So if I do this and hit save, once I publish, now we run into a situation where all of a sudden all my CSS is gone because that CSS is being loaded unsecurely and the browser is preventing it from being loaded in the first place. And we can once again confirm that using our dev tools. Here's our mixed content warning. It's pulling in Bootstrap. This request has been blocked. Content must be served over HTTPS. And in the same place, it's doing it again and blocking it again. So, you know, just one more illustration of why that's important. We have a question that came in from Christy, and their question was, are there sites where I can practice OU HTTPS and other applications for OU on demo sites online? Christy, I think that would probably be a question that I might, that's a tough one, I suppose. To a certain degree, it would kind of depend on what you would want to know about. If you're talking about, you know, is there a place where I can go to test out what things are potentially going to break when I switch to HTTPS? I'm not quite sure of any of those resources that you'd be able to check on. Rob, you might know a little bit better than I, but if there's a specific thing that you want to check on, Christy, that would be a place to go. Another thing you could potentially do is you could maybe set up an additional server that uses HTTPS and maybe copy some files over to it. And before, you know, switching over your entire main site, you can kind of have that test environment. You could set that up just as another site within your setup menu and kind of spot check things before you decide to make the full-fledged switch. That would probably be my best recommendation, and thanks to another person here who decided to throw that suggestion my way. Hat tip to you, sir. And you could pretty much just like essentially clone your staging server over to this new location, and it would just require you to have some server that uses HTTPS already. I mean, to a certain degree, that's actually what I pretty much did for this Training Tuesday. We just had this oucampusdemo.com domain that was using HTTPS. So we just kind of grabbed a couple files and put them onto this server just so we can kind of see how things work with HTTPS. What you would probably do is, instead of just putting in a couple example interior pages like I did, you could potentially clone the contents of your staging server for your main site and clone it over to that new area and then test things out from there. So that would probably be my best recommendation. You know, have another server, have that server with a valid SSL certificate, make sure that it's loading over HTTPS, and then just clone your stuff over into OU Campus, or into your new site in OU Campus as a test. Alrighty, so let's see, did we go ahead and fix this back? Let's just go ahead and make sure that we have our our content loading actually over HTTPS again. So I'll just have that go back to being a root relative link here. And we'll just publish that one more time. All right, and there we go. That's being in good shape too. So that's kind of our first step. Checking your third-party widgets, making sure all of your scripts are working correctly over HTTPS. The second step would probably be running some find and replaces to ensure that, first of all, any absolute links that we have in the system are now going to be replaced. So let's go ahead and do that. Find and replace over here. First thing that we can do is we could do actually just a couple things. The first thing you would probably want to do is you would want to perform a simple find and a simple replace that will just find all of the links that start with HTTP but are relative to actual your domain. So, you know, try to find all of your http://school.edu type stuff. If you want to make sure that you kind of capture the exact stuff that you want to capture, you could be more specific and write a regular expression for it. Rob was kind enough to provide us with a couple examples that could work here. So let me just go ahead and grab this and copy it into OU Campus here. So what you could do, I'll just quickly zoom in, it's a little easier to see. What you'd probably want to do is you would want to find http:// because that's what we want to get rid of effectively. Oh, first of all, make sure to change your type to regular expression. First step is always important there. And then inside of the parentheses, what you're doing is that the parentheses inside of regular expressions will group a set of characters and essentially almost kind of store them as a variable. So you can then call those same group of characters in the replace with. So, you know, that's always kind of a nice thing. But what you would do is just this part of the regular expression is just essentially finding any sort of characters that would be like a subdomain. So if you had something like athletics.school.edu or something like that, you would want to make sure that that was captured in your find and replace, because ultimately it's just a subdomain for your real school URL. It just might come before the school URL, so you want to make sure the find and replace captures it. And then over here, you would just go ahead and replace domain with the actual school name. So I could do OU Campus Demo, and then the /.edu just escaped the dot, and that gives us what we want to do right there. So this is what we would find, and this is going to find any URL that ultimately has oucampusdemo.edu in it and starts with HTTP, and make sure that we find any subdomains as well. So that's our first part of the regex. The second thing is we're going to just do a simple replace. And our replacement is now, instead of HTTP, we're going to give it HTTPS. And then $1 and $2 are going to correspond to the kind of variables. I'm putting that in air quotes. I know that none of you can see that, but variables effectively that we created using these parentheses. So $1 corresponds to everything that's found inside of here, and then $2 is that everything that we find inside of here. So it's pretty much going to, the only thing it will do is it will just replace it with HTTPS, but it will preserve whatever it found beforehand, because we don't need to do anything else aside from just add an S effectively. So we can go ahead and do that. And then once we find our regex, and that's kind of squared away, we can also go ahead and include any asset files. So this little checkbox to include assets is really nice, because if you ever have any sort of hard-coded URLs, whether those are URLs that are pointing to a script, or they're a URL that's pointing to an image, or just a URL that points to a link, any of those types of things, if they're in an asset, your find and replace is going to be able to hit that stuff too, because, you know, assets are kind of stored separately from the rest of your file structure. So you want to make sure that that stuff gets captured as well when you're making the change over to HTTPS. So I'm just going to go ahead and search my entire content here. And what we would do is I would probably go ahead and preview a replace right here. And it looks like I actually didn't find anything. So in that case, we're actually in fairly good shape. Looks like they didn't need to have anything else that pulled in from old content. Now, that might have been an issue on my part. oucampusdemo. Oh, you know what? oucampusdemo.com, not oucampusdemo.edu. There was my issue. Sorry about that. Now let's try find and replace, because I knew I had a couple of things that I put in here. So it looks like we found two places here. So what it found is on my interior page, I had just a simple link that pointed to, you know, a hard-coded link in my site, and my find and replace would capture that. And then it looks like I also found it in this simple redirect file. I actually want to talk about redirect separately. So even though I could use this with find and replace to make that process faster, I do want to just talk about it by itself. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do it through just this interior page right off the bat. So I would just go through this and validate to make sure that each one of the links that the regex has found performs, you know, the action that I want it to. And I would hit replace, and it would perform that action on the staging server. Just as a quick note, I always think that version descriptions are really important, especially when you're running a find and replace, especially if it's going to be a regular expression find and replace. So I'll just go ahead and say find and replace fixed internal links, or how about this, changed internal links from HTTP to HTTPS. So it's going to perform that. Now, if I wanted to, I could just go to my interior page and look at the source. And if I scroll down here, it looks like I had an HTTPS file. Or, this was the one that we just did the find and replace for. And it looks like now we have confirmed that it's pointing to secured content. So that's looking pretty good. So I can just go ahead and publish out this page. Cool. All right. Another thing that I figured that I would mention, one thing that happens when you change the HTTP route inside of OU Campus is that it also changes how OU Campus pulls in your page preview. So when your HTTP route is set to HTTPS, not only does it automatically repair your links that are managed by Dependency Manager, but it will also repair any files. It won't repair, it will change how OU Campus brings in your content via the page preview, because it will bring in the HTTPS version of the page inside of OU Campus when you change the HTTP route as well. So that's just, I guess, one other thing that happens when you change that. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing that we did. If you wanted to, you could also perform a couple other find and replaces just as another way to spot check some of the resource issues that I talked about before. So, what I had to do is I pretty much manually, just on this interior page, I manually fixed stuff like my CSS reference or my or like this script tag. There are certain situations, though, and also I did things like I manually fixed the image itself. There are situations, though, especially if you're a customer who has not activated binary management, where your files will not be loaded via dependency tags, and you're going to have a lot of hard-coded URLs in just your standard page content. Now, normally speaking, most of that stuff would probably be found using that initial find and replace that we did. But if you wanted to be even more specific, you could perform a couple other find and replaces that would capture just the page resources without also capturing links as well. Because, for example, what we just did, that find and replace before, it just fixed a simple link that pointed to another page. What I could do is I could use regular expressions to find specifically things that would just start with SRC in the code itself. So that's going to fix our links, our images, our iframes, and also like our JavaScript, because inside of those three tags, the image tag, the iframe tag, and the script tag, the attribute that actually tells the system where to pull that data from, it starts with SRC. So if you wanted to fix just some resources, you could do SRC and then roughly pretty much the same thing. So in this time, we're not just going to be fixing stuff that's referenced internally. This is going to find any source across the web that's hard-coded and anything that's unsecured. So, and then you would essentially go in and replace it with something very similar. We're going to be using that $1 as a variable again, and this effectively is just going to find everything that it can find. Oh, whoops, I forgot to put in quotation marks. My bad. So there's your opening quote for the SRC there. So anyways, this is going to be a regex that will not only find internally referenced links that you would need to fix, but it's just going to fix any page resources that you're bringing onto the page. And at this point, I've probably already fixed them myself, but if I wanted to just ensure that, I could go ahead and preview the replace and see what other kinds of things this goes ahead and finds. And it looks like we actually found quite a few. So some of these are actually just direct edit links because I used some basic, I just used basic HTML pages. So these I actually probably don't need to worry too much about for right now. But actually, no, you know what? These are direct edit links, and if these direct edit links are being added to the page in this way, this is probably something that you guys won't need to worry about because you're using direct edit in a more advanced method for the rest of your site. But in this case, you can see that my direct edit link is taking me to an unsecured version of the OU Campus login page, which probably isn't going to work. So in my case, I would need to go ahead and fix this. But you notice that it also captured this HTTPS test asset that I created. Basically, I had placed an image inside of this test asset, and that image was being pulled from some other site, and that site was unsecured. And so what I could do is I could fix that to make sure that it pulls from the secured version of my that page to then prevent getting that mixed content warning that we were seeing in our dev tools. So I could go ahead and fix that as well. So I could run another replace, and then same sort of thing, find and replace, fixed any so we could just perform that replace here. There we go, that's been done. And I could do just one more. And this one would be if I ever needed to fix any sort of CSS. So if you guys remember, CSS is not brought onto the page using that SRC attribute. That's going to be brought in using a link tag with the attribute of rel, R-E-L. So if you remember going back to my page here, link href, and then the rel is the style sheet. So we would want to make sure that we're capturing any CSS files as well that have link href as well. So we would have to just do another find and replace. And this would be kind of the final find and replace we would need to just ensure that all of our page resources were being displayed appropriately. If you guys want these regexes as a quick little example for what to use and have in your toolbox when you guys make the switch, we'd be happy to provide them. Just let us know, and we could go ahead and just place put them in the event page on the OCN, and so that would be just an easy place for that stuff to live. And we could also just put it put it into, if you guys wanted to put it in put your email address in, we could send this out to you as well. So that would be a pretty easy thing. So this regex is really, really similar. It's just finding the link href, and then it's finding HTTP, and then anything that comes after that HTTP. And then same thing here is it's going to just put in that link href again and change it to HTTPS, and then re-add everything else that was being referenced out there. Okay, so in any case, we've got this. This is our final regex. I don't think this one's going to find anything, but we can just make sure, once again, with another find and replace. Yeah, and it looks like this one is actually fine. So we just ran the test, and we confirmed that, that one's already taken care of. So that's great. All right. So with all of that in mind, that, for the most part, is pretty much everything that you're going to need to make sure you do when you make the switch over to HTTPS. It's mostly going to be an issue of changing your HTTP route to HTTPS. That will fix Dependency Manager. That will repair most of your assets. And then it's going to be a matter of spot checking to make sure that all of your not all of your assets, all of your hard-coded URLs, any of those hard-coded URLs get moved over to HTTPS. And then the final step would be to just kind of spot check some of those other things like RSS items and redirects. I don't have an RSS item here that's easy to grab, but I do have this very simple redirect. This is what's called a client-side redirect. So it's like a little thing where, hey, maybe this page is moved, and then after a couple seconds, it will redirect you to whatever page that you wanted. Inside of the source code, it looks very, very simple. It just has the key part is this little meta HTTP equals refresh. And then inside of content, it has a URL. And this URL is where, the person is being redirected to. Normally speaking, this would probably be captured by the find and replace that we did at the beginning, where we were finding all internal links that were being referenced and decided to move those over to HTTPS. And for a matter of fact, it was actually found when we did that find and replace. But you can see here that, this is just another thing that you'd want to go ahead and spot check. And in this case, the simple fix is just adding an S. Now, when it comes to other questions, and Ryan actually just asked this, why wouldn't you do a 301 redirects? I've heard meta redirects are bad for SEO. First of all, you are correct. Generally speaking, a 301 redirect is preferable. 301 redirects would be something you do on the production server. But I know that some people do have a couple of these client-side redirects still around. If you do have them, this is what you would do to fix it. If you wanted to keep your client-side redirects, you would just be able to go ahead and do this fix that I'm talking about here. But generally speaking, if you have redirects that are managed through an htaccess file or web.config or anything along those lines, as long as it's happening on your production server, that's going to be controlled through that file as well. So if you do have 301 redirects happening in your htaccess file or your web.config, you would, of course, want to review that as well to make sure that your 301 redirects are directing people to the correct location, because, you can write 301 redirects with fully qualified URLs in there. And it would be the same sort of principle to fix it. You would just go into that htaccess file or web.config and provide the new URLs. Just because that is, something you would generally be doing on the production server, it'd probably be a good idea to make sure to just kind of check with your IT team to make sure that that's not going to cause any sort of other issues, or maybe they're the ones who are kind of controlling that file, so they would be the ones to perform that action. But, since we are kind of talking about like doing things in OU campus, I know some customers do have these client-side redirect templates that they have been using for a while. So if you're one of those customers who has something that looks like this, the find and replace will capture that. But if you're using primarily server-side redirects, then, modifying that server-side file is where you're going to go to make sure that that works out. And just kind of generally as like a final little point here, when it comes to making sure your users are actually getting redirected over to your HTTPS content, once you've got everything in OU Campus squared away, once you've confirmed that none of your functionality is breaking, everything's served over HTTPS, you're not getting mixed content warnings, and everything else is awesome, then your final step is just pulling the trigger and making sure your users actually see your HTTPS content. And that kind of goes back to step 3 on the production server side of things. You can actually use htaccess files or web.config in order to make that switch and push people over to start using your secure content and seeing that information. Or if you don't want to write, if you don't want to modify your htaccess files and things like that, and you just want to kind of do a hard switch and make sure everyone uses HTTPS at all times, you don't want any HTTP content to be delivered anymore, then you can use that HSTS feature to enable that on your production server. And that will essentially redirect people for you without your need to modify a 301 redirect. It's going to use the HTML header itself, and if a user puts in an HTTP URL, the server itself is going to say, hey, wait, you should be using HTTPS, and it will serve you back HTTPS. So it's not necessarily a redirect. It's a little bit different than that. But if you want to know more about HSTS, like I said, there's plenty of resources online that can explain it much better than I can. And also your hosting provider and other resources like that should also be useful in that instance. And really, it's kind of up to you guys. It's kind of up to whatever your specific needs are in terms of deciding which method you want to go. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's going to be some action that you're going to need to take to make sure that your users are seeing your new secure content once you've done everything in OU Campus and confirmed that it's all working well on your side of things. So that's really kind of where it ends up. I know that we've only kind of looked at a couple of examples. Of course, for a real full website, there would be a plenty, you'd want to make sure that you've validated really everything. But hopefully this has given you a taste of what happens when you want to make the switch over to HTTPS. Like I said, just some recap. Find and replace is going to be your best friend. Your Chrome dev tools are going to be, or whatever tools that you're using in the browser of your choice, they're going to be your best friend too, because they're going to be telling you what content is being blocked, or if you have any sort of mixed content warnings. And those are going to be kind of your tool, your two most important tools in the toolbox. So with all of that in mind, I think that pretty much wraps up what I have for you guys today. We'll leave the time open now for a couple more questions, but while that's going on, I want to announce next month's Training Tuesday as well. We're going to be doing it August 29th, and we're going to be talking about include files inside of OU Campus. So stay tuned for the OCN blast for the registration link. But while that process is going on, if you guys have any other questions, feel free. We've got myself and Rob available.
Okay, let's see, I'm not seeing any questions coming in. I think, Jared, did you see our response to your question about what to name about your certificate? Rob did get back to you on that one. That should be in your Q&A section. No worries about that. And I'm not seeing any other questions come in other than a couple email requests, but I believe those are for Brandon.
Oh, yeah. A quick little thing about that. Christy just asked, where should I send my email address, as I stated before. You can just either comment in the Q&A, and that will automatically give us your email address, or you can just put your email address in the chat and send it to either myself or all the presenters, and we'll have your email address, and we'll send off the regexes.
All right, and for those of you asking about watching online, this will be on our support site. Support.omniupdate.com. On the home page, you'll see a section talking about Training Tuesday, and it will link directly to the recording of this video. We should have it up by the end of today, if not, definitely by tomorrow.
And if you haven't checked out our playlist of all of the videos that we also have a YouTube and Vimeo channel. And the YouTube and Vimeo channels will have all of the Training Tuesdays that we've recorded, I think, since the beginning of 2016. And that's where we'll continue to host them as well. So if you want to subscribe to that channel too, you can do that and check out all the videos that we make.
One last question. Ryan Asvita says, what are some common issues I should see when I switch over to HTTPS?
Well, I guess that's a pretty wide-ranging question. Rob might be able to speak to that a little bit more holistically than I can. We have another quick question also from Michael Novak, and Michael was asking, rather than production, will OU Campus staging be all SSL at some point, not just things like site settings? Michael, that kind of is in reference to the new feature in 10.6 that I was talking about before, kind of enabling HTTPS everywhere inside of OU Campus. So if you've made your production server switch over to OU Campus or over to HTTPS, and you have gotten all of your other things inside of OU Campus set up to bring in all of its external content through HTTPS, then you can activate that feature, and then all of the sites inside of OU, all of the pages inside of OU Campus when you're working in the CMS would be served over HTTPS. So yeah, stay tuned. When 10.6 comes out, then you can kind of read some more about that feature and test it out for yourselves. And I will yield the floor to Rob, because I'm sure you can probably answer Ryan's question better than I.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, okay, you sound
cool.
great.
So just to follow up on the everything over HTTPS for OU Campus too, first was just because remember that in OU Campus in preview especially, we actually pull a lot of your page resources from your production server for getting the preview to work. And so that's one of the reasons why we weren't able to do HTTPS unless your sites were already HTTP. So, already HTTPS. So that's why there's kind of that extra step that you guys need to do first before we can enable that on our side. But that's coming, so when you guys are ready, as Brandon mentioned, you'll be able to take that final step. Going back to Ryan's question, common issues, Brandon did kind of address here and there. First, of course, is that if you do have mixed content, you'll not see that content working on your pages. So, for example, if your CSS was still over HTTP, then you wouldn't have your CSS working, so your page would look really funny. Images or any other kind of resources like iframes and stuff like that that were still HTTP, those would just not work and either be blank or would kind of get cut out, depending. And a lot of the browsers kind of do that differently depending on how what content it is. As for not having like a certificate or certificate issues, then a lot of times you'll get a big error that says this site is not trusted. But usually you would take care of that step ahead of time, and that wouldn't be an issue for you guys. But that would be something that would happen if you were trying to test it on a site that, let's say, didn't have a certificate. I think that kind of tries to cover that. The only thing I wanted to follow up with was that you guys can go ahead and start converting some of your resources now to pulling from HTTPS, or at least checking them. So especially any external resources you'll want to double check against. Almost all Google, Facebook, stuff like that, those guys have all pretty much switched over to HTTPS for a while now. So almost all the widgets that you get from them will already be correct. But if you have any older widgets, older share this stuff, those are things that you'll want to start checking ahead of time and see if you can find either new versions that do support HTTPS or potentially replacing it with a new widget or functionality altogether. So those are things that you guys can start doing ahead of time, which would be great. Then also, keep in mind that even though you're still serving HTTP pages, you can still pull HTTPS resources into your page. That mixed content is okay. The problem is once you have your page served as HTTPS, now you can no longer pull external content via HTTP. That mixed content is bad. So you can start working on your resources now and verifying that those things are good, and then that will just help smooth the process, and you'll have a little bit less to do when you do make that final switch. That's all I got.
Great stuff. I got one other question from Jaron. Yeah. Can you speak to, is it true that going to HTTPS empowers Googlebot organic search performance lift? I mentioned this kind of briefly with my PowerPoints, was that starting in like August of 2014, Google did say that sites served over HTTPS does give you a small boost in search rankings. So there is a small little lift from that. It's minor, but it's still helpful. So there's some documentation on Google's. Google has kind of talked about that, but that seems to be kind of the way that people are going.
All right. Well, if
oh, sorry, keep going.
No,
I was going to say I don't see anything else.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was just going to wrap everything up. Yep, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so that's it for this month's Training Tuesday. Again, reminder, all of the videos or the recording of this, any other performance, any other presentation materials will be hosted on our support, will be linked to on our support site. And keep an eye out for the registration email for next month's Training Tuesday about includes. And with that, I think that's everything. Thank you everybody for attending, and have a great rest of your day.